Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Sam Kozel. I'm really excited to share my story with you guys about this project. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to present this project to all the undergrad students that I see here. Because really, without your support and with you guys contributing toward the money that actually makes this project happen, it wouldn't be feasible in the first place. So I'm really excited for you guys to be here and learn exactly what's been happening. So to start, I think it's imperative to tell the story that this project has really been years in the making. Almost 8 years actually, and it started in 2008 when the then president of the university, Jay Hellman, signed the American College and University Presidential Climate Commitment. In that commitment, Western set goals to reduce its carbon emissions to ultimately become a carbon neutral campus. In 2012, undergraduate student Kyle Brookings established the Renewable Energy Fee, which is what makes my project feasible, as a pathway or vehicle to offset those emissions. The fee is something that you guys all may or may not realize that you're paying in towards. It's $15 per semester per student, and it's a way of you guys offsetting your greenhouse gas emissions from electricity use. So the fee reads that this new optional student fee will finance the purchasing of wind energy and renewable energy credits from the city of Gunnison. It'll help the college meet its ACU PCC goals of a 20% reduction by 2020 and a 50% reduction by 2035. After a 3-year period, the fee may also be used to develop renewable energy projects on campus or in the Gunnison Valley. So as this was written in 2012, here we are 4 years later, and we're looking at what options, or I was looking at what options exist in terms of developing that on-site or deploying that on-site generation. So why renewable energy? Why were we focusing on spending this money that? As we said, to open up the panel, sustainable power has implications for clean air and water, food security, as well as geopolitical instabilities. Electricity production specifically is the largest contributor to total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, and solar photovoltaic electricity generation at point is carbon neutral. So it's a really great way to reduce those carbon emissions and reduce the contributions to global climate change. Also, I feel that investing in renewable energy demonstrates best practices through investment in a 21st century sustainable power source. But why at Western? Why renewables here at Western? First of all, this pie chart on the right shows the results from a student survey that was conducted last year by fellow graduate students Aaron Griffin and Andres Esparza. And that shows what you guys are looking for in a renewable energy project. And I think the key takeaway for me was that we're looking for maximum energy. That is, with the money that you guys are paying towards this fee, we want to get as much energy out of that as we can. So the students demanded. Also, the fee that you guys pay into contributes about $60,000 a year towards the Renewable Energy Fund. That money, in turn, subsidizes any premium or upfront capital investment that's required for this project to happen. I see it as being attractive to incoming students and applicants. There's also an educational value of walking the campus every day and seeing potentially 500 kilowatts of solar. This would be the largest system at any scale. It would be the largest renewable energy system in Gunnison County. As an institution of higher learning and a mission-based organization, I feel that Western should demonstrate leadership in its transition to a 21st century energy economy. Also, some recent findings or results of my project have shown that if invested correctly, renewables can save Western money over a 30-year time frame. So this project has required that I work with a really wide-ranging group of stakeholders, including some different solar developers from SunPower out of Denver, Custom Solar out of Boulder, and REC Solar out of San Luis Obispo, California, as well as I was advised by my project community sponsor, John Bernhardt from the Clean Coalition. They're an advocacy group advancing renewable energy transition. I also worked with the city utility director here in the Cowboy Hat, Tex Bradford, as well as the Gunnison City Council, the National Renewable Energy Lab, as well as Western's Facility Services, the Sustainable Action Committee, on which I'm the student liaison representing your guys' needs, and the student lead office. So my project's mission was to deploy on-site generation at Western. We looked at a few options here in terms of solar photovoltaics, the first one being rooftop solar and the second being a ground mount. Initially, rooftop solar bids in at a lower cost per watt installed, but once you start to scale up that system to get larger capacities, you can realize some economies of scale through scaling up at the ground mount level. So the bottom right here is some of the proposed sites that we've investigated and highlighted in yellow. The size will vary between 1.5 to 2 acres roughly, and the M there is the meter tie-in. So that's where the university connects to the city electricity grid. That's an important point of reference in terms of overall project cost. So here's the project time frame. Again, I think the highlight here is that this project really has been years in the making, starting in 2008 with Western making those carbon pledges. In 2012, the Renewable Energy Fee was established and institutionalized and has had about a 95% average lifetime participation since its inception, which is great. 95% of you guys are participating in this fee because you guys demand renewable energy, and I'm really admirable of that. In 2013, undergraduate student Gabe Stevens created a feasibility study of what options made the most sense for Western. He looked at wind, he looked at solar photovoltaics, he looked at geothermal, he looked at micro hydro, ultimately where we decided to choose photovoltaics. So with his findings and his research, I brought those recommendations to the Sustainable Action Committee in 2014, where we chose photovoltaics made the most sense. A major driver of this project being to reduce total greenhouse gas emissions, we wanted to benchmark and baseline what exactly our emissions footprint was at Western. So that was done October and November of 2014, where we inventoried total greenhouse gas emissions. In 2015, we chose the proposed site location, as was highlighted on that last slide. And then really what I've been focusing my work on in the last year has been amending the power contract, and then investigating the different options for that photovoltaic procurement. So I think it's important that we realize why we've chosen PV photovoltaics here at Western in Gunnison. This map to my left is a resource potential of solar in the continental United States. Obviously you can see the Southwest is the highest resource potential. Specifically the map to the right with that black arrow highlights Gunnison, which has a very high to above a high to very high total resource potential. The sun is not always shining, obviously. There's some intermittencies in that, and temperature taken into consideration, but the net capacity factor for solar at Western is 18.7%, or 18.7%, which is really pretty solid. So again, establishing that baseline. If a primary driver of this project is to reduce total greenhouse gas emissions, we need to know what those greenhouse gas emissions are. So through my research that took place last year, October and November, we determined that Western's annual greenhouse gas emissions from electricity production are 4,362 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. That's the same as about 10,385,000 vehicle miles traveled, or 3,700 continuous road trips across the United States. Also, to put that into context, that's about 600 homes worth of electricity used for 1 year, 23.4 rail cars worth of coal combusted, or potentially the carbon sequestered by 3,500 acres of U.S. forest, 5.47 square miles, or 12% of the Black Canyon National Park. So to put that into perspective, over the course of 10 years, basically since this project has started, we've needed the U.S. forest equivalent of the entire Black Canyon National Park just to sequester the amount of carbon that has pulled the carbon out of the atmosphere that's generated by this university's electricity use alone. Some of the project barriers that I face in terms of deploying this on-site solar have been that Gunnison has a nationally low rate of electricity. We pay almost 5.1 cents per kilowatt hour. Western also does not qualify for a federal tax credit, the investment tax credit, ITC. So that makes the financial justification in small-scale renewable projects like this pretty tough when the numbers don't necessarily always pencil out. Regulatory barriers have been significant, amending the power contract being the most significant of those, and that our city utility at its small scale and municipal utility classification does not have any state renewable portfolio standard compliances for distributed generation, meaning they don't have to source a certain amount of their power from systems like we're looking at putting on Western's campus. Some of the institutional and social barriers that I've faced have been a general lack of university understanding as well as community awareness and understanding of projects like this. Bringing something like this to city council is really hard to demonstrate what exactly it is I'm talking about and what the impact will be on the city. So to outline some of these economic barriers, on the far right there is Gunnison's rate of electricity, 5.0507 cents, in comparison to the national commercial rates of electricity, of the United States. As you can see, it's significantly low. So any system that we put on campus will have to compete with that electricity rate, making that justification that much harder. The failure to qualify for this investment tax credit has also been a significant barrier. As I said, that's a 30% total project cost federal tax credit. So what I started looking at, what that means for the university is that means that 1 unit of electricity that is a price per kilowatt hour is going to cost 30% more. So I started looking at, okay, what options exist for Western? How can we recapture some of this lost value? And my research determined that there are third-party financing models called power purchase agreements and operating leases that would enable Western to deploy that on-site generation without sacrificing that 30% total project cost investment. Western's power contract is another significant barrier. As I said, Western purchases its power from the City of Gunnison Municipal Utility, who purchases its power from different power providers, one of them out of Nebraska, the other one being WAPA, which is the Black Canyon Dam system. That contract is in effect until 2042. But in our specific power contract with the city, we agree to purchase all of our power from the city through that contract. Any change, meaning to produce on-site generation of renewable energy, would have to pass through a power contract amendment and be approved by its regulatory agency, being the Gunnison City Council. So that really led me to build that capacity of support with the Gunnison City Council and the city utility director. And to do so, I wanted to illustrate the impact that various sizes of photovoltaic deployment would have on the city electricity sales as well as the electricity grid. So this graph right here shows that at full build out, we asked for a 500 kilowatt exception. We'd be offsetting almost 10% of campus emissions, but only impacting less than 1% of total city electricity sales. This graph here, I did in coordination with incoming student Rich Stromberg. I really appreciate his technical advice on this one. But what we're looking at here is this is the average yearly demand of the city electricity grid, the load profile of the peaks and valleys of that. And then on the bottom is the production of a photovoltaic system. And what we want to see is that the photovoltaic system would never potentially be pushing electricity back onto the grid. So we used NREL's microgrid monitoring software called Homer 4.3, and we showed that it was actually only 3.2% impact. That's 3.2% impact of total grid capacity, but as I showed here, about 1% of total sales. I should mention that I brought both of those figures to the City Council, where they gave me unanimous support to formally pass and bring that amendment to a City Council vote. Hopefully that happens at some point this summer. Some of the institutional and political and social barriers on campus have been kind of a general lack of transparency. Amending power contracts like this requires very high level stakeholder buy-in. Something with issues as complex as this need to be very concisely communicated to those stakeholders. So some of the results of my project, as I said, I looked at three different options from 3 different bids that I got from solar developers, the first of which being ownership. That's highlighted in this first line here. No investment tax credit, no break even, small risk to the university, and the Renewable Energy Fund can't afford it now, ultimately resulting in a net savings loss of $48,000. The second option being a power purchase agreement with a group out of Boulder called Custom Solar. That's a third-party financing model where the third party is the owner, and Western doesn't have to pay for that infrastructure, but rather agrees to purchase all that energy over this lifespan of the contract being 20 years. Somewhat of a medium risk in that it's a 20-year contract, but ultimately yielding no dollar savings and ultimately also results in the highest unit cost per kilowatt hour. The third option, actually this is an exciting development, I just got this bid in 2 weeks ago, is from a group called REC Solar. It's an operating lease where Western essentially rents to own the system. It is somewhat medium to high risk to the university in that it's a 30-year contract. It ultimately does, though, return the lowest unit cost as well as the net savings to the university over that 30-year time span. These 2 graphs really illustrate that as well. This is the total cumulative savings of this investment, and the top is the power purchase agreement, and as you can see, will ultimately always cost the university more. Again, it's really hard to compete with those low rates of electricity. Bottom graph, you can see the system breaks even at year 28 and then returns a net savings, that tiny little piece in between the red and the blue line, from year 28 on. And those are really my most recent results. And I'm ready for some questions.
There was a petition going around on the Earth Day celebrations about the Renewable Energy Fund refusing to allow that to go towards solar energy. How is that affecting your project, and what has the progress been on that petition or movement to get the solar allowed into that system?
Right. Well, I think, as I said in the beginning, this fee was intended and designed to subsidize any premium cost of investment in renewable energy on campus. As the fees accumulated money over the years, we have continually run into these barriers to kind of hold back that investment. So while that money is just kind of sitting there accumulating funds and not being spent, there's certain interests on campus who are looking at other potential projects to invest that money. I think it's imperative that we get as much undergraduate support as we can to really demonstrate that, one, not only is this project feasible, two, it makes sense for the university, three, you guys demand it, and four, just kind of, as I say, like building that coalition of support with the undergraduate community to really make that a priority to stakeholders on campus. Yeah.
So if the utility companies offered financial incentives like net metering in the city of Gunnison, would that lower the time frame that the project would pay itself off in?
So the power contract that we look to amend was for a net metering exception of up to 500 kilowatts. But what that does is credit you at a 1-to-1 ratio for your electricity rate. So it's basically the same thing. So even though considering the upfront, heavy capital investments of some of these projects in the infrastructure, when you model out the total lifetime capacity of those projects, okay, let's say it produces 50,000 kilowatt hours per year times 20 years, 2 million kilowatt hours divided by that total project cost, that results in an ultimately higher unit cost than we're receiving from the city. And that's where, when we opened with, that value of solar isn't necessarily reflected in the city rate. Yeah, John.
Sam, you've been very diplomatic today. You're graduating, you're moving on from this project. If you were an undergraduate student in this room paying this fee, and you wanted to see the campus sort of stick to its promise to you as a student paying that fee, in this room, what would you need to know, and what would be your first step?
Well, it should be known that I've scheduled a small subcommittee meeting with the president's office next week, where he and I will be meeting, and I will be sharing some of the more financial metrics of my results and demonstrating that, one, this project is feasible, two, the students demand it, and three, it could result in a net savings at little to no risk to the university. From the university's perspective, the chance that this renewable energy fee would lose participation over the years or lose its solvency in terms of being able to subsidize that premium investment between the current rates of electricity, which are as low as you'll see, and whatever that premium rate comes into is kind of a significant factor for him to consider. I would say overall, signing that petition that was spoken to earlier, if anyone's interested in being at that meeting, I think it'd be great just to demonstrate to the president's office and to various stakeholders on this campus community what the fund's intentions were as outlined, and really that there's just been a lot of work in advancing this project. Aaron.
I know it seems like you're proposing a really large solar project, which I think is awesome, but do you think any of your work this past year would have moved faster or been smoother if it was a smaller project that you had proposed?
What led me to some of those other modeling options in terms of operating lease and power purchase agreement is those are on the smallest level that you'll see contracts like that offered. So you're not going to see a power purchase agreement for a 50 kilowatt system, and you're not going to necessarily see an operating lease for that size system. What's great about those is that you're able to scale up production and receive some of those economies of scale in your unit cost of electricity. As I kind of said there, for Western to go out and buy solar panels, I've kind of deemed as being a financially irresponsible investment, just in that there's so many constraints or so many value losses in not qualifying for that ITC. And that's the main one. But I don't know, there maybe should be some middle ground in terms of just getting, I think there's a lot to be said for even getting a 50 kilowatt system put on campus, which would still be the largest system in the county.
Just so you all know, for comparison, Kelly Hall's is 5 kilowatts. So he's talking about multiplying that by 100.
It's about 2 acres of solar panels on Signal Peak underneath the water towers. And we've met with Dr. Mark Steiger about, there's some archaeological sensitivities that have been considered, and that site is still viable.
Thank you, sir.